Humanistas digitales. Tengo el gusto de presentar a Beth Peile. Ella es Director of Data to Insight Center y director de Persuasive Technology Institute en la Universidad de Indiana. Por supuesto, tiene un currículum muy importante y muy impresionante, pero en realidad creo que lo que nos interesa a nosotros fundamentalmente es escucharla a ella, de manera que sin mayor introducción, en realidad les doy la palabra. Thank you.
Right. Thank you. Buenos dias. That's it. All right. I am delighted to be here at the Biblioteca Vasconcelos and also honored to be an invited speaker. I come here representing the HathiTrust Research Center and also HathiTrust. I'd like to set the stage and tell you a bit about who I am relative to digital humanities, because I think it's important for what I will say. Informatics, I am in a school of informatics. I am a professor of informatics. Informatics is the application of computer and information science to data that constitutes the primary research material of that field. So that data is textual data. In Europe, digital humanities is sometimes called cultural informatics, but I think that misses the point because I consider myself an informatics person, but I bring a computer science and information science methodology to problems in digital humanities where the methodology of a humanist is quite different. So I think that the term cultural informatics doesn't quite capture it. So I am an informatics researcher with computer science methodologies, and I've worked in geoinformatics, so I've applied those methodologies to geoinformatics for about 15 years, and over the last 5 years have branched into digital humanities, and it's a much harder space. It is a much harder space because basically I'm on the science side and you are not. and there's a gap there. I've been working on it. It's taken me 5 years. The going is slow, but I'm continuing to work on it. Okay, so that's the perspective I bring. So digital humanities is an emerging discipline. This is taken from the University of Illinois Library website. It's an emerging discipline that applies computation to research in the humanities. More than simply conducting research with computers, digital humanities scholars use information technology as a central part of their methodology. I like this definition. Okay, also, I'm drawing from a categorization that Brent Bobley, who's with the National Endowment for Humanities in the United States, gave in 2009 at I believe it was at a Haystack conference, where he categorized digital humanities activities in terms of access, production, and consumption. You know, I'm not sure, I don't want to make this a point of discussion, but I do want to refer back to it, so I use it. So access is access to materials, be those, you know, and cultural heritage materials, books, newspapers, paintings, film, and so on. He goes on to say that everything on that list is being digitized in numbers. Again, this is 2009. The production, scholars producing their work, and consumption being, I like one point here, people getting their materials in all kinds of new ways. I like the last sentence here where bits and pieces of varied content so reading, the way we read is changing. The way a digital humanist reads is changing. Bits and pieces of varied content come from so many places and perspectives. And I like that because I'll refer to the bits and pieces again. So then he goes on, and this is why I cite Brent Bobley's 2009 interview, is he goes on to predict, and he says, if I had to predict some interesting things for the future, I would sum it up in one word, and that word is scale. Scale in terms of big, massive data, texts. That's what digitization brings. So this is, again, 2009. So he then goes on to pose questions to the audience, the digital humanities audience, saying, you know, how might quantitative, as opposed to qualitative, technology-based methodologies like data mining, text mining, information retrieval, help you better understand a giant corpus, help you zero in on issues? You know, what if you were a historian and you now have access to every newspaper around the world? What would that mean for the questions that you ask of that and the interrogation you do of that material? And finally, how might searching and mining that kind of data set radically change your results? We're 5 years later, and we're still, I think, trying to answer those questions. I'm certainly still trying to understand the answers to those questions. So the goal of my talk is to introduce the technical, architectural, big data developments that are happening around HathiTrust, and then also give you emerging examples of use, and with the hope of facilitating a discussion, and with the language barrier I have, which is unfortunate, I can't facilitate a discussion well, but facilitating a discussion around whether Brett Bobley's 2009 prediction of scale, big massive scale, which is here today, can now deliver on advances in digital humanities. So let's look at HathiTrust. It's a consortium of academic and research institutions, basically motivated by Google going to University of Michigan and saying, we want to digitize your library, California Digital Library, Indiana University, University of Wisconsin, Virginia jumped in, and they said, that's fine, you can do that, but there's got to be a copy that remains for scholarly use, and that consortium was built around that copy, and that consortium is HathiTrust. So the founding members are Michigan, Indiana, Indiana's where I am, University of California, and University of Virginia. I point out, I'm making a distinction here because you'll see this in the, that worked a second ago. Hold on. Okay. You'll see the distinction in logos here. There's one on the left and one on the right. The one on the left is different from the one on the right in what way? It's got a little bit of gray on the bottom. And that little bit of gray is us. Okay, so this is HathiTrust logo. This is the HathiTrust Research Center logo. And I'd also point out, because again, I'll use these logos to transition from a discussion of HathiTrust to a discussion of HathiTrust Research Center. And I also point out that the URL for HathiTrust Research Center is at the domain of HathiTrust. So that's worth pointing out. So HathiTrust is now at 11,158,000 volumes with a total of close to 6 million book titles, 3.9 billion pages, and that equates to 500 terabytes and 132 miles and 9 point whatever tons. It's worth pointing out, and we will revisit this, that 34% of that is in the public domain, making the remaining 2/3 under copyright. And that is a real central issue. So the content is books and journals from pilot projects around images, audio, and with pilot projects around images, audio, and born digital. The sources are largely Google, so 97% of the digitization is done by Google. The Internet Archive makes up 3%, and then local sources make up a trivial amount. You look at the source, the sources of that content, in other words, what library or source contributed the material that was digitized. You can see this is a little bit dark, but you can see the blue portion here is University of Michigan, and that's at 45%, followed by California Digital Library, which is coming in at 33%. The next largest is University of Wisconsin at 5%, Cornell at 4%, and so on. Content distribution. The whole of the 11 million volumes is on the left, showing 1/3 in the public domain and 2/3 in copyright. Of those, 360,000 are Spanish volumes. And then if you take the 1/3 that's in the public domain and break that up, so this is that 30% is this pie chart, we can see that it's difficult to read the text here, but it says that this 10% of that 30%, in other words, 1/3 of that is public domain in the United States, so only public domain in the United States, where the remaining 2/3 are open worldwide. So here we transition and we look at the volume on the left-hand side, the repository as it exists with its 11 million volumes. And on the right-hand side, we can transition to a motivation for the HathiTrust Research Center. So the HathiTrust repository it's a massive scale repository, and it's extremely exciting. It's extremely exciting because of that. It's a gold mine in terms of access, computational access that hasn't been available before. So it opens up, in my mind, it opens up questions it opens up the opportunity to ask questions that were not askable before. But the restricted nature of parts of the repository suggests new forms of access that honors the restrictions on the content, but also tries to preserve or port's not a good word, port's the word I would use, but that's not a good word, that preserves the intimate nature of interaction with text. Going back to my geosciences background, we provided access, basically we provided workflows for weather forecasts, where you could send off that workflow, it would run, and you would get the results back. That's very, very different from a digital humanities researcher interacting with the text, what they tend to do very intimately with a cycle of interaction that's very tight, and that's a challenge. That's quite a challenge. So preserving the intimate nature of that interaction with the text with honoring the restrictions of this very large corpus. Okay, so the size, and this is the main motivation for the HathiTrust Research Center, the size and the restrictions coupled together demand a new paradigm, and this is a new paradigm of research in the digital humanities where computation moves to the data and not vice versa. We had a conference, and it was at Stanford University, and John Orwant stood up and said computation needs to move to the data, and that was probably in 2010. So this is not something new. So the HathiTrust Research Center was established in 2011 to enable computational research, in other words, quantitative research, across this comprehensive body of published work for purposes of scholarship, education, and invention, and this, with the scholarship and education being primary. The executive committee of HathiTrust is myself and Stephen Downey. We're co-directors. Some of you may know John Unsworth, who's has a long-standing name in digital humanities, and then Beth Sandor and Robert McDonald are librarians at Indiana and Illinois. So if we look at what the HathiTrust Research Center is in a very simple diagram, simple cartoon diagram, we've got our digital humanities researcher on the right, and they are issuing a request, and what comes back is something that is the next step in their work, be that spatial plots, it's a tag cloud, statistical plots, or tabular information, something like that. And then there's all this stuff back here with a essentially a complexity hiding interface. So let's break that open and put our digital humanities researcher over here and that complexity hiding interface off to the right and blow that cloud up. And there's really 4 pieces here. There's tools to do text mining, to interact with the text. I'll call them text mining tools. There's the HathiTrust data. There's other data sources, and then there's compute resources. So what HathiTrust, in a very simple form, what HathiTrust Research Center is doing is basically brokering on behalf of this person to select the tools, to select the data, to use other sources of data, and to execute what needs to be executed. I do want to point out the repository from the extracted feature sets, because this is a huge area of development within the HathiTrust Research Center, I think both for use reasons and for copyright reasons. The repository itself is the 11 million volumes. For some people, 11 million volumes may be fine, but you run I'll describe a little bit about topic modeling, and I think the terminology here is slightly different. But if you try to figure out the topics across 11 million books, you get garbage, So there's got to be some subsetting on genre, on something. And these could also be features instead of the OCR text itself. So we're seeing a growth in these extracted either feature, databases, or like genre subset databases as a form of interaction. I have a double arrow here, and that's actually means a lot more to me than it probably does to you, but what it means goes back to the intimate nature of the digital humanities relationship with his or her texts, and that it's not just, grab the text mining algorithm, grab the data, grab their data, and then run it and return the results. It's deeper than that, and I'll show you an example of that, and that's actually a huge challenge. Okay, so going back to Brett Bobley's categorization of digital humanities work into access, production, and consumption, I would like to highlight what HTRC access. HTRC narrows down essential materials quickly. So one can start with some set of books that's bigger than what they might normally use, all the newspapers in the world, and narrow down quickly to the relevant subset. Production, here I would call this the computational investigation that can't be done easily with some of the computational methods that are used today on text. And then finally, this consumption, the tracking the bits and pieces. This is a little bit looser. I'll leave them alone. Okay, so one quick slide on access. This is the HathiTrust portal. There's a notion of a workset builder. This is difficult for you to read, very difficult for you to read the details on, especially since my gray got washed out. Faceted search on the left-hand side using blacklight. I've logged in I'm searching for English books, World War I, and poetry. So I'm searching for English World War I poetry, and I get 580 results back, and I can select some number of those. So when the libraries were digitizing content, it took them, and I was talking to a group of librarians, and I said, and it took them a couple years to figure out that they're submitting duplicates, and which they assured me that that process of identifying duplicates across libraries was actually a very difficult process. But it did take 2 to 3 years into the digitization process before libraries started contributing unique content instead of content that was important to their library. So you will find a fair amount of duplication in something like this. So selecting some of it and not others would make sense. So I can build this work set, and when I build this work set, I can then generate a tag cloud from it. And I won't take you through that, but this is kind of a prime way of thinking about access. But what I thought would be more useful would be to go through examples of some of the work that we've seen already, because it might be closer to how you think about your problems. So, and I'll talk to topic modeling, author gender identification, and then using topic modeling to locate philosophical arguments in science texts, which is my favorite example. So topic modeling, it gives you, it can answer more complex or nuanced questions. What are the primary themes of an author? What are the primary themes of a research domain? It provides more data than a word count does. So let me show you an example. And you can extract hundreds of topics. So looking at Dickens' works, okay, this is a tag cloud on 2 topics that have identical centralities, which is Dickens, but have separate themes. So if we look at the one on the left, it is more strongly focused on the book with words like illustration, volume, and literature, where the one on the right, again, both on Dickens, is more strongly focused on the author himself with words like letter, household, house, and so on. So that's topic modeling that results in a tag cloud. This is work that's done by Ted Underwood. He's in the English department at University of Illinois. He is doing topic modeling on these 4 words. It's actually all of these words, but these are the top words. And he's showing for a set of books that include fiction, poetry, drama, biography, nonfiction, letters or orations. We don't have the count here. Over the period 1750 to 1900, where is the predominance of this topic, like, light, wild, over, and it's showing that it peaks in maybe 1820, and it's most dominant in poetry. So this is an investigation into essentially thousands of texts using topic modeling. We'll see another example of topic modeling. Next example, some work that Stacy Kowalczyk had done, trying to identify author names, author gender. So her question was, can we use author names in bibliographic records to identify gender? She looked at 2.6 million bibliographic records and extracted the personal author data, came up with 606,000 unique personal author strings, relying on standard catalog practice. She comes out of the library community, by the way, so this may be slightly less relevant an example. And It's quite illuminating. And we know all this in the United States. ORCID is pushing where we get unique identifiers. So this is a similar example. There's the author, and then there's all the names that they get published under. And when you're trying to definitively identify gender, that you have to deal with these names. So this is one person and many, many forms that their name takes. So the sources of data. The first source of data is the Virtual International Authority file that's hosted by OCLC, definitive source for information. The rest of it, not so definitive. In fact, I'll point out in another slide, but 17% of the gender resolution Stacy and Zong were able to do came out of that source, and the rest, the 80%, came from other sources, non-definitive sources. So she was looking at Census Bureau, baby names, EU patent research names, and so on. So the results, approximately 80% of namings have initial gender identification using these multiple sources, multiple creative sources. And I want to point something out. I made this point already. So 19% were resolved by looking at the OCLC VAIF source. And the rest, the other 80%, were coming from other sources. So the challenge that we have in the HathiTrust Research Center, we brought this information in, but haven't completely integrated it because librarians don't trust that other 80%. they trust the OCLC source. So in this text correction, there are a number of these issues that are quite challenging when there's uncertainty involved in the computational method. And there's uncertainty involved in virtually every text mining error correction method you employ. So how do you represent that uncertainty as a research question, basically for us? Okay. Another example is this is work done by a cognitive scientist and history and philosophy of science person, Colin Allen at Indiana University, and this was funded under the Digging into Data challenge. That was a worldwide challenge. I don't think it was funded in Mexico, though. So what Colin is trying to do is, well, more formally, establish points of contact between philosophy and science, but worded, I would word this as taking science texts, biology, chemistry texts, and finding philosophical arguments in them that are at the sentence level. So he's not looking at philosophy texts, he's looking at science texts, and he's trying to narrow down where these philosophical arguments are being made. And he's using topic modeling to identify these volumes that are written in this topic. And let me just take you through the steps. So he started with 1,315 volumes from HTRC, from HathiTrust, HTRC or HathiTrust, using keyword search for Darwin, Romanes, anthropomorphism, and comparative psychology. And this was with the help of a librarian who worked closely with him to get that initial 1,315 identified. He's not going to read those 1,315 books, because that's too many. So he's using computational methods to narrow that down to a set he can read. So starting with that 1,315, the set contains a lot of uninteresting books, like, of course, college catalogs. I'll throw those out. Throw out quite a bit. From the 1315, he ended up with 86 volumes. And it's using IPython. So this looks horrible, but it really is not. So let me just take you through. I explain with the title what's going on. I also explain there exactly what is in this command right here, which is a Python command. And then I show you the results. And I'll show you about 4 different slides. I'm going to take you through the whole process here, so I'll show you a number of these. So he types in, he's doing topic modeling on anthropomorphism at the volume level. So he's applying topic modeling to the entire volume. And he gets a set of topics back. These are the set of topics that he gets. He manually inspects them, picks one as the best, as the closest, and that is topic 16, animals, evolution, life, animal development, man, species, cells. He picks that as the best topic. For that, he goes to behind that, each one of those topics is a set of books that hit against that topic. So he pulls up that book list, and each one of those books has a URL to the source. So he picks one, and the book is Biology and Its Makers with portraits and other illustrations, and he clicks on that handle, and it takes him to HathiTrust's page turner. And he can, he gets, this is the scanned image of the book, and he sees it's in the public domain. He also sees he can download the whole book as PDF. It's in the public domain. And there's a mark, and there's a mark on every one of these books. It's embedded in the handle, but it's also in the book, University of California Medical School. That's the source of that digitization. Okay. We click on another one here. Here's a second one, The Riddle of the Universe. This one's slightly different in that it is in the public domain in the United States. However, I logged in. You can't see that up there, but it says, "Hi, Playley." Very, very friendly, because that's my username at IU, at Indiana University. Okay, hi, Playley. All right, but because I logged in and it recognized that I'm in the United States because I logged in through a U.S. institution, it allows me to download that whole PDF, which it wouldn't otherwise. This is a page turner, so you can turn the pages through the book. You cannot well, you could download it here, but you can. This is a way of interacting with this book, is through the page turner. So he can page turn through the book and see if it's content that's interesting. Okay, so now he's done the volume leveling and got it down to a smaller set of books. Now he repeats that topic modeling at the page level. So same thing again, only now we're looking for anthropomorphism, animal, and psychology. And those 3 terms are typed into this IPython interface. And we get another list of topics. And here, the top 3 topics are picked. And again, now we're seeing the set of books. Again, we've narrowed into a smaller set of books. Okay, last iteration here. Now he drops down. Now he's gone from 1,300 books to 86, down to 3 books. And at that 3 books, he's actually modeling at the sentence level. So there's a structure for modeling at the sentence level that I won't go into. It uses machine learning. And, this is the structure of what that might look like. And finally, the last slide here is, this is early work, but he is actually able to pull out one sentence from one of those texts that revealed an argument that he was not previously aware of. So effectively what he's done, and he would argue, again, and I've said this before, a person in trying to sort this out is not going to read the 1,315 volumes. They could potentially sort it to a smaller number, but this is a way of getting access, specific access to books that are specifically relevant. And if they were in copyright, this might be the time to actually go grab the book through an interoffice library loan or something like that until I'm moving into the whole issue of copyright. But this is a way of narrowing in on specific content. But what it means is you have to trust the algorithms, because the algorithms threw away the other, you know, whatever, 83 volumes. So you have to have some trust in those algorithms. Okay, so there's the reality. The big reality is full text download is limited by both size and by copyright. Again, this is computation moves to the data and not data moves to the, I'm sorry, yeah, computation moves to the data instead of vice versa. So the starting point for research can't be, I'm going to amass as much data as I can on my laptop and get started. That's the hard part. So through funding from the Sloan Foundation, we've been working on something called the data capsule, the HathiTrust Research Center data capsule. So it allows computational materials. So, copyright. I expect people in the audience work. You know, how many people are bothered by copyright in their life? You know, yeah, okay, all right, okay. It's my biggest pain. Yeah. Okay. All right. So copyright in the United States, the kind of stuff we're doing is probably fair use, and we're pushing ahead in bits and pieces, you know, in small steps toward that. But there's a lot of negative attention in the United States on this issue of copyright. So, copyrighted materials can be computed on, yes, that's fair use, but not downloaded for human consumption, for human reading. So what we're trying to do is enable the research interaction without allowing basically the monetization of books. So it's a secure framework. I'll show you what's behind it. It's a secure computing framework that trusts that the researcher will not deliberately leak data. That's actually an early assumption we're trying to remove because we can't necessarily trust the researcher. But prevents malware from acting on a user's behalf from leaking data. So it accepts user-contributed analysis. So it's one thing for us to say, come and use our text mining algorithms, and we'll generate tag clouds for you, and that's quite inadequate. You know, it's another thing for us to say, you know, you're doing some pretty interesting text mining work with this interesting topic modeling, like Colin Allen's example. We'll just give you a container to run that on, but it's going to be your code and not ours, because you're the one developing that. And that's the problem we're trying to solve. And then also, we're also expecting that some of this computational investigation you don't do on your laptop unless you want to occupy your laptop for a week. I mean, it's computationally intense. So utilizing public compute resources, you know, public supercomputers is going to be, it has to be a piece of this. And right now we're using big compute machines, supercomputers at Indiana University. So what does this look like, this framework look like, the HathiTrust Research Center data capsule? So we've got our researcher on the left-hand side, and she wants to run something that she's developed. How many people know what a virtual machine is? Yeah, okay. Virtual machine is sort of like a laptop that doesn't weigh anything. And you can move it around easily. They're real nice. Okay, so we basically, it's like a machine. It's like a computer. Okay, so we give her a virtual machine, but it's running at Indiana University, and we run it in this secure capsule. And I'll show you, I've got another slide, but basically then she will SSH into it and work on it. Let me just show you the next slide, which gives a little bit of a process here. Okay, so the researcher requests a virtual machine. That gets created for her. You know, she wants Windows, she gets Windows. She wants, you know, Linux, you know, Red Hat, different Red Hat. She gets Red Hat. She gets Linux, Red Hat. Ubuntu, she gets Ubuntu. Okay, So that gets set up for her, and then she gets an SSH command into it. I'll show you a picture of that. That'll make that one easier. And then while she's loading her data into it and her code into it, you know, she wants R installed, she can install R, she can install anything she wants really, but while she's doing that installation, these things are locked up. And then there's when she's ready to run, she types in a command, and it locks out her ability to download, and it opens up the windows to the data and also to her results, because her results need to go through a review before they go back. So this is how we're trying to support research on the copyrighted content. So this is terribly, terribly blurred, and I'm sorry for that. The big window is your desktop. The little window is our data capsule, but it's running on your desktop. And if you notice, this is Colin Allen's IPython running in this data capsule. So he sees on his desktop, he sees an interface, a desktop that looks just like his own desktop. And he's interacting with his IPython tool just as he would if it were running on his desktop. So this again, this is what we're working on. Okay. So I've got one more point here, and this is actually shorter than I had expected. I'd like to thank our sponsors. The HTRC would not exist were it not for internal funding by Indiana University and the University of Illinois. And then also the Alfred P. Sloan Foundation, the Mellon Foundation, and then recently HathiTrust. So I should say, when HathiTrust was first formed, there was an authors group in the United States that tried to stop Google from digitizing. And there was a major lawsuit that was introduced. And in the agreement for that was supposed to be 2 research centers that got set up, both funded at generous levels. So we were asked, myself and it was then John Unsworth, who was at Illinois at the time, to put in a proposal for the HathiTrust Research Center. So we did. And then the settlement never happened. So HathiTrust said, gee, we really like your proposal. Go for it. And there was no money behind it. So again, through the generosity of internal funding from Indiana University and University of Illinois, we are where we're at today, and we now have a far more solid agreement with HathiTrust that gives membership benefit to HathiTrust members that includes services of the HathiTrust Research Center. And also, what's my other point? Yeah, that's probably, oh yeah, and then also, okay, at the same time, we are transitioning from having the public domain corpus, which is the 1/3 of the total corpus, to having the entire 11 million volumes, including the copyrighted content, and having those within the HathiTrust Research Center. So we are going through extensive security reviews at Indiana University and Illinois University in anticipation of that. So we've got, we've got 3 things. We're at a tipping point, to quote Malcolm Gladwell's term. We've got the copyrighted content coming. We've got a path to HathiTrust researchers, and we've got a data capsule that we think will enable the forms of research that researchers need. Again, all coming together. So we're at a really important point right now, and a really exciting point. So let me pull all this together. So going back to, in the upper left-hand corner, Brett Bobley's quote, if I had to predict some interesting things for the future in the area of access, I'd sum it up with scale. Big, massive scale. Okay. and the paradigm of computation moves to the data and not vice versa. The ability to filter down, trusting the analysis algorithms to filter down and reduce the number of books one has to manually interact with. Then we get 2014, 5 years later, we're at massive scale, we have the massive scale, but the access on that data is constrained, and it's constrained by copyright, and that's been there a long time. We can slowly remove barriers, but we can't remove them completely. So can digital humanities researchers work within these constraints, and will they find it worthwhile to do so in terms of the new questions that show up or that are possible, as opposed to the hardship in terms of a transition in methods and ways of working. And I don't know the answer to that, and I would be delighted to hear from you, who are the experts in this. Okay. Thank you.
Tiempo para preguntas, no sé si
Do you want to take that?
la audiencia ya.
Do you have a projection of how many volumes would there be by 2020, for example? I mean, do you have projecting data?
So, I can use this. Okay, and that's a good question. Initially, when Google was digitizing, they were digitizing large numbers. That tapered off. And HathiTrust, their model of membership now is, and we were looking at this. I was at the library at El Colegio de Mexico. We were looking at the benefit to membership in HathiTrust, and they're shifting the benefit now to long-term preservation of content, of a member's content. So it's no longer the massive push to digitize. It's now, you know, a member library wanting preservation and long-term preservation. Important and really expensive. In the United States, people run away from long-term preservation, you know, because it's expensive and it's a long time. So anyway, so I do see we won't see the growth curve being quite as it was. And if I had to project in 2020, I think some of you could project as well as I. Maybe another few million, but certainly not another, probably not doubling.
¿Alguien más?
I promised Beth that I would help with an anecdote of HathiTrust research, so maybe I'll tell it quickly in English, and then I can also say it in Spanish because it's of interest to the people here. At Stanford, we have a doctoral researcher who studies the evolution of Portuguese and Spanish in the Americas, and he used very large numbers of HathiTrust provided out of copyright materials to do that. Entonces, nuestro investigador pidió a nosotros en la biblioteca que sacaran de la HathiTrust unos como 15 miles de libros en portugués para estudiar la evolución del idioma portugués en Brasil. Y ahora va a continuar con el español, la evolución del español en las Américas, con como 30 miles de libros de volúmenes de HathiTrust. Y la investigación es bien interesante y se hizo posible solamente por colaboración de HathiTrust. Así que, thank you.
I have a question about that thing in the box on the middle, which seems to me to be a really important question about can humanists work with digital humanities researchers, work within the constraints. Now, one answer is it's not like they have a choice. So yeah, they have to. But another question is, can they do good work within the choice, within those constraints of, you know, snippets from copyrighted material? And it occurs to me that one place to look at that is how Google Books is being used, because it does something similar. And I'm wondering, I gave a talk a little while ago about how a book that I've published is being misquoted, in the sense that people are using snippets from Google Books and to infer the opposite argument from what the book is actually making. And so I suspect, and I've spoken to a number of publishers and authors about that, and it appears to be actually a real problem, that being cited much more than they ever were before they were, but the quality of the citations is increasingly poor. And so it seems to me to be a really interesting research question. Are you guys tackling that outside of HathiTrust? I mean, are you taking it as a usability question for your own application, or are you looking at it as a larger question about what happens with humanities research when it's forced to work with snippets, given your original point about the way that humanists work quite intimately with text in really a feedback cycle?
That's pretty amazing. I guess I'm not surprised. Boy. Who would fund that? I mean, let's write a proposal. No, that is not something we are taking on. Again, I think it has to be taken on. It has to be addressed. Boy. Yeah, thank you for pointing that out.
Following up on that question, how does HathiTrust see itself vis-a-vis the pirate libraries, the shadow libraries? So this is something me and a couple of colleagues have been doing some research in a few years, and there's a lot of discrepancy between the content of Hathi and Google Books and the content of the pirate libraries, but we're still talking same amounts of volume. And we researchers have full access where the data comes to us illegally, so I don't recommend that anybody break the law. Of course, I'm not suggesting you do so, but if you were some kind of illegal pirate researcher, you could do much better quality work because you have access to the full text. And as copyright law erodes in the future, how do you see yourself playing out in this world of light and darkness?
Okay. Yeah. It's okay, we have plenty of time. I may use 10 minutes thinking about that one, but so I think if we ignore Google for a moment, I think it is, why should a researcher go to HathiTrust when they can get something easier illegally? I mean, via some peer-to-peer system thing, a downloading system. And I would hope that at some point, volume matters. So, I would think that, and we had some of these discussions yesterday, that having your data in a source where the preservation is guaranteed on it allows you to build services on top of that. And it's those services that are valuable. It's those services that give you the faceted searching, that give you the ability to organize things and save them and then come back to them later and so on. So if you've got a pirated source, the services you build on top of it, first of all, are going to be visible, so they're going to be found, so you'd be reluctant to build services on top of it. And the preservation argument is not there also. So while it may benefit somebody for a short time, it's not going to benefit them for a long term. We've talked about reproducibility. The work that a person does is done on some version of content that in reproducibility is a very big argument in the United States on the ability to reproduce your research, particularly in the sciences. So if you're doing your research on a certain snapshot of the content, a vehicle like HathiTrust can give you the ability to, can support reproducibility on that snapshot, where all bets are off on a black market copy. I guess that's where I would see the benefits.
I have the microphone. You have said that quantity matters, scale matters. You've asked a question about scale, about the constraints, asking us whether we can work within these constraints. There is another question which is much more important to me. I work with material which is out of copyright. Almost every time I go to Hathi, almost every book I look at, well, every volume I look at in Hathi, the text is full of errors to a degree which is, much of it is simply unusable. So that is the text. I also find over and over again that the books, the metadata about the volumes is inaccurate. Volumes are assigned, often ludicrously, centuries sometimes, to the wrong century, or almost even the wrong millennium. What is Hathi doing about that? Is this something which is actually, because this really is a serious constraint. It stops me using Hathi, very much so. Is this something which is actually being addressed at present?
Just for the broader audience, the books that are out of copyright tend to be pre-1923, and again, many of you know this better than I do. Pre-1923, so the fonts were different, so the OCR isn't as good as it might be on later versions. So you do tend to get more erroneous texts in the public domain content than otherwise. But that could be because that's what we have, so that's what we hear more about. Yes, the problem is a big problem. Let me go back to the gender argument, and I mentioned this briefly, and I think it's relevant here. There are, in the gender argument, 17% of those author identifications are trusted, come from a trusted source, and the rest are less certain. The accuracy is less, the sources are less certain. The authority of the sources is less certain. Okay. We could improve the metadata and roll the gender identification in, but we've introduced uncertainty that the researchers may or may not be comfortable with. In the HathiTrust Research Center, we've made a philosophical decision that we are breaking from the HathiTrust as the original authoritative source, and that allows us to, we could run correction on the copyrighted content. We could do that. We could do that today. Would you trust it? That's the key question. Let me ask you this. If we did that, would you trust it? Or would you say, this is garbage, you didn't do it right? I mean, look, if I may, if I can turn that back to you, but that's the question we're dealing with, is there's uncertainty in any correction we do, there's uncertainty, and how do we convince you that correction we made is acceptable to? I don't mean to challenge you, but that's the hard part.
Well, it seems that we're quite straightforward simply to correct massive numbers of errors in the OCR. We have thousands of people who would be prepared to put time and effort into going through the OCR files and correcting them, as has been done with other projects. Perhaps there is a project already doing this in HATHI, I hope there is, but I haven't heard of it. The same is also true of metadata. We have now centuries of experience in indicating where books come from, where they were published. We have all the libraries in the world at our fingertips now more than ever. So we can say for sure that this volume was published this year by this author, by this publisher, etc. These are things we can do. I really hope there is a will within the HATHI Trust to do these things. And I hope that you can tell me there is.
What we are looking for in applying the limited resources that we have is looking for basically a set of users, if I may use the term, who said, yes, we want that, we need that. And if we had that, that would be sufficient motivation for us to undertake it. Mm-hmm. And so maybe there's a discussion, a follow-up discussion that could be had. Could we host that today? Yeah, we could roll that in quite easily. And we've got the storage for it, we've got the computation. Yeah, we could do it. Yeah. And I think it needs to be done. Yeah. So, all right.
Bien. ¿Hay alguien más que quiera?
Thank you, Beth. I really enjoyed your talk. I'm not really sure if I understood correctly the matter of accessibility, because HATHI Trust, the collection, it cannot be accessed around the world, except for those who are members of the consortium, the whole collection. Is it the same case for the research center? The tools available at the research center, can they be used around the world by anybody that's not working at a partner institution?
Yes, the portal is open, and people can log in. We are shifting. We used to be completely open, so you could give us a Gmail address, and we were completely happy with that. But as we transition to securing the copyrighted content, we would ask that, we're narrowing it some, and we ask that the logins have a university affiliation. So when you log in, you give us your email address, and then we send an email back to your email, your institution email address, and then this is pretty typical. And then you click on something, and then you get you get your login authorized, and that gives us some assurance that we know. Our security people have asked us to have some sense for who we're giving accounts to, so we're slightly tightening it down, and also. With the recent funding from HATHI Trust, we've dedicated some resources, human resources, to HATHI Trust members. So those are human resources and compute resources. So if someone came in, again, they would get less of our help if they were not a HATHI Trust member, and if they wanted to run something that took 1,000 computers to run on, we would probably get on the phone with you.
So in that case, it's more on a researcher basis, not so much as an institutional basis.
Well, and there's another piece, and I didn't talk to this. I didn't think it was quite that relevant, but I think it is important. Part of what we're working on is a model where the library can work with researchers and not bring researchers in, because that's not the role they're playing. But your library has provided access to the texts for a long time. I mean, a long, long time. That's the role they play. And they mediate, you know, they interact with researchers who work with the texts. So just because the texts are digital doesn't mean the librarian is taken out of the picture. And in fact, the librarian could say, oh, you know, you're trying to find some set of books. Well, hey, run a topic model. Go to the portal and run a topic model. You might want to choose these words, you know, which they might use anyway in searching. So part of what HathiTrust Research Center is doing, and this is being pioneered out of Illinois, is the Scholarly Commons, where it's a set of workshops and materials, and we were talking yesterday about translating those into Spanish, that a library can go to another library, so the other library can set up their own scholarly commons and help their researchers at their university. So we are, in terms of our access, much of the access to this point has been with individual researchers, but as this scholarly commons becomes more, it's brand new now, gets more mature, we will see access through libraries as well, and librarians as our point of contact.
Thank you.
I'm a little surprised because you talk about some sources which copyright is overseas copyright. You talk about in the USA, and you can download that material only from a USA institution. Why are you caring about other countries' copyright? It's like so much work for the same team. You're not looking just about America's laws and your internal country problems with copyrights, but the world's copyright problems, and I don't get why.
So again, there are probably people in this room that could answer that question better than I. Okay, so HathiTrust tends to be conservative, and they're being conservative because every time they turn around, they get a lawsuit thrown at them, and they've had multiple lawsuits thrown at them. And I've heard one person say, and the most recent lawsuit was over orphan works. It got thrown out. It was the Authors Guild issued the lawsuit. It got thrown out, and the judge made some really strong statements on not ruling against the kind of computational access that HathiTrust is giving. So it was just a very strong statement of support. So a person who's high up, who's a VP at one of the universities against which the lawsuit got issued, said he thought that we were getting the lawsuits because the entity issuing the lawsuits was really trying to go after Google, but Google was too massive, so they were going after HathiTrust to make a statement. So I don't know, but it does tend to make people very, very conservative. So HathiTrust is keeping very detailed databases on the copyright status of every book they've got. And they're also very, very willing and eager to open up as much content as they can, and they encourage communities coming to them, and if they can argue something can be open, they'll open it up. I mean, so they're very, very, very strongly in favor of open access. But as part of their caution, you know, if it's in public domain in the United States, it may not be in public domain outside the United States, and they're making the distinction. And it does affect 10% of the work. So.
Okay. So. Bueno, muy bien. Terminaríamos esta mesa plenaria y la siguiente mesa es a las 4 de la tarde. La siguiente serie de mesas sería a las 4 de la tarde, de manera que Muchas gracias a nuestra presentadora
Gracias.
magistral. Muchas gracias a ustedes por atendernos y nos vemos en un momento.